just figured it out. He said it's already on.
It's been a busy summer.
Hi, Brian. How are you? Welcome. Hi. Good. No. I wasn't.
You just let me know what you want to do next. You ready? I'm ready. Okay.
It's yours now, right?
Express 2 days Okay. Let me just text that. Either way, whatever you want.
Welcome, everyone, to the Oklahoma City Human Rights Commission. We have a quorum of the commissioners present, so I'm calling this meeting to order. I just want to tell you how happy I am to see this room full, and this room itself, too, is so beautiful and significant in our city's history. So I'm really happy to be here. This is the first year of our Human Rights Commission, and we're embarking on this year of learning. We're learning, we're reading, we're talking, we're listening, we're having discussions to create common ground among us and sharing with the city, too, about the meaning of human rights and the history of human rights in our community. And today's presentation is a very important part of that journey of learning. And we have a wonderful historian and artist and others here to help us with this discussion. And they will be introduced in just a moment, but I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and introduce our commissioners, just to make sure you know who our commissioners are on this brand new Human Rights Commission. Come right in, Dr. Van Beskert. Speaking of a commissioner, she knows how to make an entrance, yes. So I will begin with one of our commissioners who's not here. Anyone here from Ward 1? It's kind of the far northwest part of our city. Ward 1 commissioner is Ralph Crawford, and he's an Oklahoma City native. He is an Army veteran who served 2 tours in Vietnam. He retired from the Oklahoma City Fire Department after 27 years of service. So his voice is very important to our commission, and we are missing him this morning unexpectedly, but he said to give his greetings to everyone. Ward 2 is kind of in the center. Anybody here from Ward 2? And City Councilman James Cooper is our City Council member from Ward 2. So Cindy Wynn is the commissioner from Ward 2. Cindy Wynn is the policy director at the ACLU, and she created the Asian Task Force for Oklahoma City and very involved with the Asian community. So Ward 3, who's Ward 3? Yes, Barbara Peck. Okay, I've got to get my wards out here to make sure. our Ward 3 commissioner is Barbara Peck, and she also serves on the city council for Ward 3. She is the construction development director for our own Love's Travel Shop and Country Stores, and brings so much to our commission. Ward 4 is Dr. Leslie Van Buskirk, and very recently she was a teacher in our Oklahoma City public school system, and now is with United Way. So we really, really enjoy having her contributions. Ward 5, Brian Wall. Brian, raise your hand. Anybody from Ward 5 here? Okay, we do have some. Great. So meet your commissioner, Brian Wall. Brian is a fourth-generation Oklahoman and a member of the Kaw Nation, and very deep background in marketing and communications, but right now he's working in Indian health area. So, Ward 6, Anna Daisy Escalera. Anybody from Ward 6? All right, a lot of people. That's great. So, Daisy Escalera, I've known for so long, almost when she was a kid, I knew her. But Daisy grew up under the protection of DACA as an immigrant from Mexico with her mom. She's now a U.S. citizen, and she is an attorney for the Oklahoma City Public Schools. So she is wonderful to have. Dr. Marcia Dempsey Heron is from Ward 7. So Dr. Heron, oh gosh, she is now the Director of Student and Organizational Success at the Oklahoma School Board Association. But she's lived a life in education. She was a dean at Langston University and just has held many positions that help us have a profound understanding of kids in the classroom. She is our vice chair. Thank you, Shaylin. She's the vice chair of our commission, and I'm grateful for that every day. And Rhonda Hooper is our Ward 8 commissioner. Ward 8, anybody here from Ward 8? Yes, a few people. Okay, Rhonda Hooper is an entrepreneur and a city leader. She was the president of the Oklahoma City Chamber a few years ago. She's deeply involved in our business community, owns Jordan Advertising, and has really been helping us understand how to let people know, hey, the Human Rights Commission exists, and we're here, and this is what we do. Actually, we're just figuring out what we do, but she's helping in that regard too. So those are our commissioners. Those are your commissioners. And we hope to see you often at our meetings. It's really important for us to hear from all of you and for you to share with our thought process as well. So, okay, now we are going to follow the agenda. I don't know if you picked up the agenda from the desk outside. This is an open meeting, and we're following the Open Meetings Act. Our next agenda item is to introduce and welcome our new compliance officer for the Human Rights Commission. So Shaylin Jackson will have the pleasure of doing that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And she didn't brag on herself enough, but can we please clap for our chair, our esteemed chair, the Dean Emeritus, Valerie Couch. She's amazing. Shaylin Jackson, I oversee the inclusion and diversity efforts here at the city, and so a part of that is the HRC compliance officer sits on my team. Up until yesterday, we were a team of 2, myself and Jackie Howell, and then yesterday, Emma Wadniski joined us. Before I welcome Emma up here, I just want to give one more round of applause to our public information and marketing team. Without them today, this would not be happening. So thank you, Christy, the phenomenal Christy and her whole team. Thank you. Emma, get up here. Tell us who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name's Emma Winiski. I just started yesterday, and I got to the city last Thursday, so I'm very excited to be here. I just finished my master's in public policy. Before coming here, I worked with different governments focusing on 911 diversion and substance use disorder work primarily, but I'm really excited to be here, excited to work with you all, and we'll stick around after the meeting and would love to say hello to anyone who'd like to come chat.
Back to you.
I also want to welcome Jared Beatty and Rita Douglas Talley, who are just such a great support to us. They're from the legal counsel's office in the city. Are we getting into much legal trouble yet? I hope not, but we know that we have you beside us, so thank you for being here. All right, now I'm going to turn this over to our vice chair, Dr. Heron, and she's going to introduce our special guests. Dr. Heron, do you want the handhold? Okay.
All right. I have papers. First, let me say thank you to Dean Couch. Dean Couch is the chair of the Human Rights Commission, and she gives so many opportunities to the commissioners, especially Cindy and I on the Education Committee, to just shine. And so when she even brought up the idea of being vice chair, I was like, no, and she said yes. So I said, okay. So I have the honor of introducing 3 people today, so just hang in there with me as I do their introductions. Today, I'm honored to share more about Dr. Bob Blackburn, a renowned author, public speaker, and former Oklahoma Historical Society Executive Director. He grew up in Edmond and graduated from Putnam City High School in 1969. After completing his PhD at OSU, Dr. Blackburn began his career with the State Historical Society in 1979. As executive director for the Oklahoma Historical Society, Dr. Blackburn created an entrepreneurial business plan that consisted of higher standards, greater efficiencies, and more effective partnerships. His tireless efforts led to a string of new programs and projects that attracted significant new streams of revenue, as well as high-performing employees. He was instrumental in planning, fundraising, and constructing the Oklahoma History Center. Under Dr. Blackburn's leadership, the Oklahoma History Center became an affiliate to the Smithsonian Institution and the National Archives, the only institution in the country with that status. He has appeared numerous times on the History Channel and other national outlets, consistently giving more than 100 speeches a year, published scholarly journals, and co-authored 22 books and written screenplays in his spare time. His many accomplishments include Lifetime Achievement Award from the Oklahoma Journalism Hall of Fame and induction into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame in 2022. His hobbies are reading, running, carpentry, landscaping, and golf. He is married to the former state representative, Debbie Blackburn, and they have one son, Bo. Our speaker today has been called a precocious talent, a scholar, a renowned historian, and a lifelong public servant. More intimately, he is also known as husband, father, and I'm sure his favorite title, grandfather. Dr. Blackburn will be accompanied this afternoon by Mr. James Loftus. James Loftus has been a practicing architect and expert witness for over 50 years. His practice ranges in work from Florida to Hawaii and the Pacific Rim, including Australia. Jim was the designer for the Oklahoma State Department of Health building and the iconic Murrah building. Jim's community service includes saving the Overholser Mansion with Mayor George Shirk, 15 years on the Oklahoma City Historic Preservation Commission, and 13 years on the National Registry of Historic Places Commission. He co-founded the Board of Visitors for the College of Architecture at OU. He has been honored by the Oklahoma City Public Schools Foundation with selection into its Wall of Fame and has received the American Institute of Architects Lifetime Achievement Award. Following 22 years of service, he recently retired from the Oklahoma City Arts Commission following the dedication of the commission's $500,000 Light as a Feather outdoor sculpture in Scissortail Park, for which Jim served as a juror. James served as the Rotary Club 29 president, 2008 to 2009, and was honored as one of only 5 Rotary Club 29 members with the club's Lifetime Vocational Service Award in 2021. Our second James of the day is our very own councilperson, James Cooper. Councilperson Cooper took the oath of office in 2019. He was formerly a middle school teacher and an adjunct English professor. He is currently an English and Film Studies artist in residence at Oklahoma City University. He is a published writer, appearing in the Huffington Post, board trustee, rising star, lawmaker of the year, civic leader, change maker, and a 2020 champion of pride. He also has authored resolutions about public safety priorities and law enforcement reform related to mental health and homelessness in his council role. James Cooper is on a mission to make life better for the residents of Oklahoma City. Please warmly welcome Dr. Blackburn, James Loftus, and later City Council Member James Cooper.
Well, thank you. It's very gratifying to see that so many people are concerned and interested in the struggle for human rights in Oklahoma City and Oklahoma. And let me start with a statement. It might be a little controversial, but I've got to say it. And I'll end with the same statement and a little bit more elaboration on the future of the Human Rights Commission, is that Oklahoma history has always been a state with injustice. There's some famous episodes, such as the Tulsa Race Massacre, Osage murders, the massacre at the Battle of Washita. These are famous, but history is full of injustice. And perhaps even more controversial, still is today, and more than likely always will be. And what the Human Rights Commission can do is to help tear down these walls of injustice, as others have in the past, through education, looking at rule of law, trying to change people's hearts and the way they look at their community and those around them. And then hopefully, if we really believe in justice in our hearts and have the appropriate laws, and then with love in our hearts to reach out, we'll have a better community. So what I want to do today, in about 40 minutes, is to go through a couple of episodes of injustice in Oklahoma City history, largely, but some more the state. You really cannot take the city out of the state in terms of history. But I want to go through a few episodes of injustice based on race, based on gender, based on religion, ethnicity, language, pigment of a person's skin. And through all of these episodes, we have had people in our history who have helped shape what happened by dealing with the challenges that they faced and seizing the opportunities that were there. So even though I may have started with a negative assumption that injustice is part of our history and is part of our community, I'm an optimist at heart, knowing that we can break through and we can improve our communities. It's happened time and time again, which will be my story today. Well, you have to really begin this. We're going to have feedback if I go to this. No. You have to start this story with American Indians in Oklahoma. The longest time period when we have really dealt with injustice is the way the American people have dealt with American Indians. And again, it has improved, and there are people who have broken through those challenges to seize the opportunities and improve our communities. And you have to go back to American Indian policy, starting with George Washington. At the time, it was dealing with tribes as independent nations that required treaties ratified by the Senate, negotiated by the administration. That would be the way it was in the early days, largely with a solution of moving Indian people away from non-Indian communities, often to the frontier where they are more isolated. And that's the way Oklahoma history changed so much in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase. The federal government was going to remove the 5 tribes in the southeast, the Cherokees, Choctaws, Chickasaws, Seminoles, and Muskogee Creek, and say, we will move them off to this distant frontier this land we now call Oklahoma, and there they'll have a couple of hundred years to acculturate, to change, and be good little Americans. But still with that attitude of, is their culture, their religion, the way they deal with each other, their worldview is wrong, and they need to change and embrace progress and become good little Americans, was the attitude. It all changed during the Civil War. All the tribes sided with the Confederacy. Some of the tribes were split. Some battles, there were equal number of Cherokees, and especially Muskogee Creek on either side of the battles. But as punishment, the federal government took away their western lands, forced them to allow the first railroads to come through to start the journey towards statehood, of allotting land and severalty, of changing that ancient way of looking at the land as no one owns the land, it belongs to us. Communal ownership. They were forced to start that path in 1866. By 1870s, the Supreme Court says treaties no longer are valid. Congress can change any treaty based on the whims of politics in the leadership in Washington, D.C. And it was changed. To fast forward, 1898, the Curtis Act was passed by Congress. And one of the leading advocates for Indian reform, of doing something for Indian people in the country, Senator Henry Dawes Commission, you may have remember that from your textbooks. Henry Dawes stood up at a group of friends of the Indians and said, I've been to the Cherokee Nation and the prosperity is everywhere. You don't see any poverty. People, through generosity, helping their neighbors. If someone runs out of corn before the next harvest, the neighbors will come in. The tribe takes care of their orphans, takes care of education. He says, but they're missing one thing that will make them progress. And this is the word he used, greed. He said, without greed, without personal property, they will never progress. They will be locked in this barbarian state of uncivilized ways of life. That was the attitude in 1898. Forced to allot their lands in severalty, the other tribes, we eventually get to 39 tribes in the state, many of whom were still culturally in the Stone Age, who were forced to allot their lands overnight. And then you follow that with statehood, with abolishing tribal governments, with the boarding school generation of taking Indian youth out of their families, away from these so-called corrupting influences, sending them off to schools where their hair would be cut, their language would be prohibited, their religion called uncivilized. And then coming out of it. These are the challenges that American Indians have faced in Oklahoma with episodes like the Osage murders. There are people who have broken through that. Just a couple of quick stories. There was a man named Robert Jeremiah Love, born in the 1850s in the Chickasaw Nation. His grandfather had been a Scottish loyalist who moved among the Chickasaw Nation during the Revolutionary War. Had two different families, a lot of kids. The Love family were dominant mixed blood leaders. And as the tribe was forced west, the Loves, like other mixed blood families, like the Rosses, and among the Cherokees, the McIntoshes, a lot of Scottish influence, here they come with the ability to deal with both the American government, could speak English, understood contracts, dealing with the full-bloods who did not want to, wanted to be left alone to live with their own culture. And here come the Loves. Robert Jeremiah Love becomes an orphan during the Civil Wars. Parents are killed. There was more death and destruction in what is now Oklahoma during the Civil War than in every other state, including Virginia in terms of per capita loss of life and property. Devastated the tribes, set them back. Robert Jeremiah Love is an orphan, learns to be a cowboy, making $8 a week riding the range for ranchers, making contacts with his fellow Chickasaws, building his network in his own community, but also reaching across the Red River to the Texas Cattlemen's Association and the branch that's there in Gainesville. And he starts marketing south of the river and doing what he can for his people. Well, Robert Jeremiah Love happens to have a ranch in the right place at the right time. Here's the opportunity. He's developed these contacts, understanding commerce, nose cattle, horses. In 1870-something, during the Chickasaw census, he only owned 2 horses and 23 head of cattle. Really coming from poverty, trying to break out of that cycle. Because Congress allows the Santa Fe Railroad to build through the unassigned lands. And in 1885, as the crews come north out of Gainesville and south out of Ark City, and they're going to meet somewhere in the Chickasaw Nation. At the time, no one knew exactly where. But they needed beef to feed their crews, constructing 8,000 calories a day. A lot of beef was needed. Robert Jeremiah Love, with his contacts in Gainesville, his contacts within the Chickasaw Nation, gets the contract to provide the cattle. And as those crews are moving north, he's making money. He's helping his friends, his relatives, sell their cattle. That money goes into the economy and is spreading out and helping his people. Then he finds out through his friendships where the 2 rail crews are going to meet, just south of the South Canadian River. He claims that land as any Chickasaw can do and creates the little town of Purcell. And of course, all of you can sing the song about in 1892 when a man named B.C. Clark established his jewelry store there because Robert Jeremiah Love had created this town. And he opens the bank. He brings in a cotton gin and an oil mill. He starts other businesses and builds the Love Hotel that's still there today. Go to Purcell. You can visit that hotel. Second largest hotel in all of Oklahoma and Indian Territories when it opens in the 1890s. Only one bigger in Muskogee. Well, fast forward, his grandson becomes an attorney, is discovered by Robert S. Kerr and D. McGee, becomes president of Kerr McGee. His son sees a niche in the business community of going into small rural towns that are shrinking, finding a piece of property he can lease for nothing, buying gasoline at some of the refineries in Oklahoma, finding a hardworking kid to run that on partial shares, becomes Love Country Stores, travel stops to this day, one of the largest family-owned businesses in the country. Another story of an American Indian who was able to break through the challenges forced on him, a man named Lawrence Hart, one of my heroes in life and a dear friend who I miss daily. Lawrence, Cheyenne Arapaho, full blood, born in the little community of Hammond in far western Oklahoma in the 1930s. Born at the very time when his older brothers and sisters are being forced to go to boarding schools, theoretically to lose their Indianness, to become good little Americans. Lawrence is precocious, raised by his grandparents. His grandfather had been born right after the battle of, or the massacre of the Washita in 1868.
What was his name again?
Lawrence Hart. Lawrence Hart. And Lawrence is raised in this very conservative Cheyenne community. The Cheyennes who settled that far west wanted to get away from Darlington in Fort Reno and the corrupting influences of this changing culture. So they're the most conservative branch. And his grandfather, very conservative, is raising Lawrence. Lawrence would not speak English till he got to the first grade in the local schools there in that Red Moon district. His grandfather was one of the 42 Cheyenne peace chiefs at the time, so a leader in the community, teaching young Lawrence a way to live his life the Cheyenne way, to respect others, to serve, to be a man of peace and reconciliation as a peace chief. Lawrence is smart. His dad becomes an interpreter in a Mennonite church there in the Red Moon community. Lawrence grows up, becomes a Mennonite convert, goes off to school because he wants to fly jets. He finds out you have to have 2 years of college. He goes to a Mennonite college in Kansas, gets his degree, joins the Marines, passes the test, and becomes the first full-blood American Indian to be a jet fighter pilot in 1954, where the world is still deeply embedded in the Cold War. He's there on the front lines protecting us, a warrior, a Cheyenne warrior in a jet. But a couple of years later, his grandfather is ill. The other Cheyenne peace chiefs have to decide who to bring in to take his place. They know about Lawrence's character. his sense of service, his religion, man of God. And they say, Lawrence, we need you to come back and take your grandfather's place in our community as a peace chief. Of course, he has to give up being the warrior. Cheyennes that had war leaders, that had peace leaders. You've got to give up. He decides to give up his commission. And the day that he chooses to be initiated into the peace chiefs, he flies his jet to Oklahoma over at Clinton. He then goes and they go through the ceremonies, and he rides the pony around the teepee. He goes through the ceremonies, makes the pledges. And then when he leaves, he gets back into the jet and goes out over to the Gulf of Mexico and breaks the sound barrier. Sonic boom. A symbol of this changing time that has affected his people, his family. And he becomes the peace chief. He becomes chairman of their tribal government. And to fast forward to how Lawrence used opportunity when Congress passed the Native American Graves and Protection Act. Because of the injustices done to American Indian communities around the country, is that people could dig up their burial goods and put them on display, and usually in natural history museums, as if American Indians are part of the animal world. He becomes chairman of that, works for the Smithsonian, represent that in Oklahoma. We become friends starting in 1989, get my century straight here. We become friends and start working together. When they find some skeletal remains of Cheyenne children at the Smithsonian that had been collected by some soldier on the high plains and taken back to Washington, the Cheyenne people don't want to deal with those human remains. We took them at the Historical Society until they were ready to bury it, and we transported it to put them in the grave. And then when the Historical Society started an effort to preserve the site and to honor those Cheyenne men and women and children who were killed with Custer's attack on the Battle of the Washita in 1868, I was assigned the task, find a way to do it, working with the Park Service, working with the landowners. Frank Lucas, Don Nichols were very much a part of the political side of it, but we needed more than that. We needed more than politics or rule of law. We needed to change people's hearts and minds about it. And believe me, in Cheyenne, Oklahoma, it was not popular to celebrate Indian culture. That attitude had survived, as it does so much around the country, and in Oklahoma we see over and over again. Pulled in Lawrence, says, Lawrence, I need your help. I need your spiritual help. He brought in the chief of the tribe at the time, brought in the keeper of the sacred arrows, sat in a room with the Park Service officials, walked out, and I say, gentlemen, it's your choice. Do we go forward with trying to honor this disastrous episode in your history and share that with the rest of the world, or we walk away? They said, let's go forward. 1995, it became a unit of the National Park Service, telling the story of this assault on people because of the way they lived and looked, worshiped. Well, we're still dealing with those issues. Tribal sovereignty is an issue today. It was in the paper this morning. What we have got to do, letter of the law, to have the right laws, the right agreements, with an attitude of respect and an attitude of understanding the facts. How do we correct the abuses of the past? How do we deal with the scars of anger and assault? It is an ongoing process today and always will be. Well, to understand Oklahoma history, you have to understand that we are a land of immigrants. Anytime I hear anti-immigration rhetoric, it angers me, because if you're looking for the essential Oklahoma story that separates us from what happened in Kansas or Arkansas or Texas or New Mexico or any other state of the union, it's the fact that we are a land of immigrants. America can say that largely, the melting pot. We are the melting pot of the melting pot, and it happened overnight. In terms of history, usually things happen over decades, if not centuries. Here, it happened over years, a land of immigrants. First, almost every tribe except the Wichita, the Caddo, and maybe the Osage, who were in this area before Louisiana Purchase. Every other tribe has been removed here. They're colonists. They're immigrants from another land brought here. Said, now you've got to find a way to live together in this strange new land. How to get along together, not to declare war, not to put restrictions, but create opportunities. And then you get the land openings and the movement into the Indian Territory. So you get first the white intruders, and then you get others moving into the Indian Territory. Here, of course, April 22nd, 1889, the land run, and then a series of land openings all the way leading up to statehood. So in a very short period of time, 1889 in the West, an allotment of all these Indian lands, 1898 with the Curtis Act in Indian Territory, in just those few short years to 1907, all the land is converted from tribal ownership or federal ownership to individual ownership. People are now putting down roots in the land in less than 2 decades. Think about the last 2 decades of your life. It's a blur. It just happened. Well, that was what was going on in Oklahoma, and people literally had come from around the world. We had the Scots-Irish, bringing Scots-Irish culture. That's another entire speech about Scots-Irish culture in America. There have been books written about that and how that became dominant in a culture, and it is in Oklahoma. But we also had others coming over from Germany. This is an age of German immigration in the American West. This is the age of the Germans from Russia fleeing the czars and coming over to the Great Plains where they can grow the wheat they know about. This is the age when African Americans, both the descendants of the slaves, and I'll get back to that story here in a little bit, is claiming their land, and then immigrants out of the Old South being driven out by the end of Reconstruction in 1876, the oppression, this new form of slavery in the Old South, and here come people fleeing, coming to Oklahoma for a new opportunity. You get Jewish immigrants, Lebanese immigrants fleeing the Ottoman Empire. You get a variety of people coming from Mexico and South America, Eastern Europe finally. Even the Jewish community is separated into the first waves of immigrants who are more European, and then the Eastern Europeans, and differences in the communities. And so all of these people are here in the land we call Oklahoma. And then you throw in the differences in religion, very important on the American frontier. I remember when I went to college, I'll never forget the person interviewing me for my college enrollment. She said, "What's your church?" And I said, "Well, I'm Christian." She said, No, I mean, are you Baptist or Methodist? That was the assumption in Oklahoma. You were one of those two. Well, we had a variety. Large Catholic population had come in with the Irish, later the Italians and other South American Mexican immigrants. We had the Jewish faith. We had Greek Orthodox coming in with the Syrians, or Lebanese as we call them now. And then you had the American Indian religions that were still here and surviving the assault on tribal sovereignty. So Oklahoma was defined by diversity in 1907, but yet Congress says we can become a state. We can elect people from our communities to send to Guthrie to create a constitution that is supposed to create justice for everybody. And it's all white men. Typically, same religion, same worldview. They gather in Guthrie, and they bang out the Constitution.
Didn't we get some immigrants from Texas?
Some, in fact, our most famous immigrant, Alfalfa Bill Murray, from Toadsuck, Texas. I'd like to say that, and Jim knows that. But here's the chairman of the Constitutional Convention, this small-town lawyer from Texas, who believes that the perfect community is all white, run by males, one religion. That was his idea of the perfect world and this Constitution that's going to create stability. I call it conservative populism. He was very much anti-business, anti-urban, very much country, that everyone should be a farmer. Everyone should have the same look, the same way of life, and that was embedded in our Constitution, conservative populism. They wanted, at that convention, to disenfranchise African Americans from the vote. Theodore Roosevelt, the president, says, if you do that in the Constitution, I'll veto it. We will not allow that to go through. So they added it. First session of the legislature. They dealt with the issue, can women vote? This is 1907. And the answer was no, women should not vote. They've got a place in the home. And if they can't make it there, maybe as a secretary or a teacher. Traditional ways of women could get into the workplace at the time. And all of this would lead very naturally into another movement that's national in scope, called the Ku Klux Klan. Very much a grassroots effort that's coming out of largely rural areas of the country. It starts in Indiana, of all places, but spreads very quickly across the country. And in Oklahoma, a large majority of white people, especially in small towns, join the Klan. At one point, we think 2/3 of the state legislature by 1921 were members of the Klan. And the Klan was there not just for purity of race, to make sure this was a land for white people, but it was also a form to fight back against change, the vice people were seeing in the movies, the messages they were hearing over this new technology called records and radio. And this New York City morality is spreading around the country, and there's a no, fight back. And they become vigilantes to take care of what they considered out of the norm and what should be. And the Klan is there. Well, there's a young lady that fights back against all of this, conservative populism against the Klan, Kate Bernard. I've got to quickly get through this one. But Kate Bernard was born on the frontier in Nebraska. Her daddy moves here, Logan County. She's raised there. By the time she's 16, she moves into Oklahoma City, gets a job as a clerk, one of the few jobs allowed women at the time, Catholic, on top of the glass ceiling that all women had at the time. She's got the glass ceiling of being Catholic in a very Protestant town. She gets a job with the territorial governor, starts building her contacts, gets involved with a thing called the Provident Association that takes care of, we have 5,000 homeless people right about statehood in Oklahoma City because of the boom that had started in 1898, grows too much, national recession in 1907, homeless people. She reaches out. There's no governmental organization to help. She said, we need to do it as a community. If not in the law, at least in our hearts. Let's give money. Let's take care of these people. She meets labor organizers who are fighting against the exploitation of labor, of poor people moving in from the farms, both African Americans, white, riches, everyone. There's an oversupply of labor, exploitation. She says we need to resist, we need to organize. She gets involved with them, meets a man named Peter Hanratty, an Irish immigrant who's in charge of the unions over in the mining district. And here comes her opportunity, Constitutional Convention. At a time when Alfalfa Bill Murray is the dominant voice, here is this voice of resistance over here coming from a woman, small of stature, but mighty orator. In fact, later on in their careers, Alfalfa Bill Murray would refuse to be on the stage with Kate because he would never win the debate. And he was an attorney used to debate. But Kate was speaking up about what she felt we needed to deal with injustice in the community. 8-hour workday, compulsory education for all children. In that we need to look at people who make a mistake in life, people who have been sent to jail, people who made a mistake. The common idea at the time that they are now in another form of slavery will work for people, few people making money out of that. At the time, our prisoners were being sent to Kansas under contract. Kate is fighting all of these, and all of these issues that I just mentioned. and an entire Department of State government created to take care of those who need help. The Department of Corrections and Charities. It's embedded in our Constitution. And Kate, at a time when women could not vote, and she could not vote herself, except for local school board elections, she is elected with the greatest plurality of any candidate on the ballot in 1907, becomes commissioner, Department of Charities, Corrections, and she uses that bully pulpit to draw attention to injustice. Her biggest splash is when she goes to Lansing, Kansas, sees that our Oklahomans are being treated as slave labor, abuse, makes it a big scandal. State legislature responds by appropriating money for the newest scientific type of prison that they would build in McAllister the next year. She is using her bully pulpit to help others, and she gets involved in resisting the exploitation of another natural resource in the minds of many people, American Indians, many of whom are declared incompetent. That's the word that the federal government used. You're an incompetent Indian. You should not have control over your land, your resources, the money that's building up in your accounts. You should have permission to leave the community. And then the orphans that are being created at a time when disease is still taking out much of the American Indian population. Local court systems are appointing custodians. If you've been to Bartlesville, the Triangle building that's just been renovated as a hotel was full of attorneys. Frederick Drummond told me when he was a kid, was still full of attorneys who were the guardians for those kids. And of course, you can imagine where the money was really going in most cases. I'm not saying a total, but there was abuse. In the criminal justice, civil justice system failed those American Indians at the time. When Kate is run out of office, and she's not very popular, you can imagine. I'm married to one of those women who likes to speak up and share her opinion. Not always popular. Kate is defeated in an election. All the forces are against her, but she doesn't give up. Where's the next challenge? Got to fight for these Indian people. Angie DeBow would later write about this, become an advocate in the 1930s. But in 1915, Kate becomes a leading member of the Friends of the American Indian, takes on protecting Choctaw orphans. Federal law is changed in 1920 because of the efforts of Kate and people like her, who said, we have injustice in this community, we've got to change the law, and long-term work on their hearts. Now, of course, the greatest injustices in Oklahoma in the last 100 years at least have been with the African American community. And this problem is embedded in slavery. Slavery came to the Indian territories with the 5 tribes. There was one Choctaw, Robert M. Jones, who owned over 250 black slaves scattered on plantations. Most of the mixed blood leadership of all the tribes had African American slaves. It was brought here. And there have been apologists who try to say, but it was a kind slavery. No. Ownership of another human being, it cannot be kind by its basic definition. And it's embedded in the culture, not just among the black population, but the white population that has to use fear and tyranny and the whip. It becomes part of that community. And the inability to know that you are doing an injustice suddenly seems okay, because it's the way it's always been. That was the culture coming out of this era during the Civil War, gained their freedom. And in Oklahoma, really, 1866 is when slaves were freed. Here, one little difference in the story is that Congress forced the 5 tribes to give their former slaves and their descendants land, if and when they would allot their land in severalty. That was the beginning of the all-black towns, Clearview, Boley. And this blending of African culture, of Indian culture, all put through the process of the frontier. You have these communities. Boley at one time had 5,000 people, several banks. It was called, this magic place on the frontier in the black community across the country. But still, we have the ruling class, legislature, Senate Bill number 1 is to segregate the races based on the pigment of a person's skins and where they can ride in a railroad car, where they can go to school, what water fountains they can drink out of in town. Taking the racism of many people at the time, de facto segregation, adding legal separation, and saying it is okay, it's the law of the land. U.S. Supreme Court in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, say it's okay to have separate because it's equal. Well, of course, it was never equal. That was the fantasy of the time. But it's okay, it's the law, it's the way we've always done it, and it's the way it'll always be in this community. Two communities split because of the pigment of a person's skin. Then on top of that, you throw in the institution of terrorism with lynching, with assault, with taking the vote away from an entire group of people through the grandfather clause, the poll tax, which means that no black person can sit on a jury, which means you're not going to get any justice in civil or criminal court. The challenges are building. In Oklahoma, 28 individuals that we know of were lynched in a 20-year time period at the turn of the century. Out of this comes the ability of a community, and this, I'm getting out of Oklahoma City now, but I want to use this as contrast. In Tulsa, which was a raw frontier boom town with a lot of young single males who had left the farms and their communities to find these good paying jobs in the oil patch. And in 1921, May 31, a black man is accused of assaulting a white woman on an elevator. He's taken to the county jail. A group of about 1,000 young white males from the community gather and say, give us that guy, we're going to lynch him for assaulting a white woman. Sheriff refuses, but word spreads around town. A group from the Greenwood district here in Oklahoma City, it was Deep Deuce, was our all-black community at the time in it was a segregated town within a town. Tulsa, Greenwood, a few young men go over and say, Sheriff, we'll help. He says, don't need your help. They go back. Word spreads that some of these African-American men had come over armed. Everyone was armed at the time, but here they come bringing guns into, quote, our part of town. Crowds begin to grow. Within 2 hours, it goes to over 2,000 people. Again, those brave young men in Greenwood come back again, this time 75 of them, with guns on their cars. Confrontation, guns, fire. About 20 bodies hit the ground just instantly. And that starts a night of violence that would end with the entire destruction of the Greenwood commercial and residential district. Just a couple of statistics here that make it seem distant and not real to us when we put them in these terms, but 35 blocks destroyed, 1,256 homes burned, looted, 159 businesses burned, 27 official deaths. It was higher than that. We'll never know how many. How many people were prosecuted for that violence? 0. How many claims were settled for loss of property? 0. Talk about injustice. It's hard to find something that fits that description more than the Tulsa Race Massacre. I was chairman of that commission back in the 90s and trying to uncover the facts. We'll never know all of the facts. But the fact that we now have a museum over there, Greenwood Rising. Yeah, we can be set back by something like this, but we can keep trying. We need to resist. We need to work together for a better community. That's going on now. Well, one man who went through all of this, who would have an impact on Oklahoma City, John Hope Franklin. If you've been in a Black history program somewhere, you've probably read or seen his book, From Slavery to Freedom. Knopf commissioned him in the 1950s to write the first textbook on the African-American story in America. Brilliant book. I had it in college in the 70s. And John Hope Franklin was 1 year old during the Tulsa Race Massacre. His dad was an attorney, had just moved from Renniesville to Tulsa, lost his office, all of his possessions, set up his office in a tent, says, I will represent people in my community, and stayed, moved the family over eventually. John Hope grew up in that community, went to Booker T. Washington in a segregated school system, but smart, ambitious. And he told me, he said there was a conspiracy. I don't know if he used this term or I came up with it, one of the two, a conspiracy of silence. The white community didn't want to talk about it. They were embarrassed. It wasn't good for business to say, hey, move to Tulsa and we'll burn you out. The other side, he said, we were proud of those young men who resisted that day and tried to protect young Nate in the jail. We were proud of them, but that's a pride we could not express on the streets of Tulsa with lynching, vigilante justice, but we were proud of that around the dinner table, in our social clubs, in our churches. He said that pride was there. And John O. Franklin would go on to Harvard, first black PhD out of the history department at Harvard, wrote the book Slavery or Freedom, Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Clinton, very active in the civil rights movement at the national level, but an Oklahoman at heart, came back to several meetings. He was in the History Center 3 or 4 times over the years. But resistance of understanding that we can make progress, fighting through those challenges. Well, I use that example in Tulsa to say, well, did something like that happen in Oklahoma City? No. Why? Why did we not have similar violence? We had a similar culture of vigilante justice. We had the same segregation. We had the same lack of understanding because people lived in a different community on the other side of the tracks where we never got to know people with different pigment of their skin other than if they were, either servants in the home or working somewhere in town. This lack of sense of community was there very much in Oklahoma City, just as it was in Tulsa. But it never happened. In my opinion, goes back to leadership. In this case, one of my heroes in all of history, Roscoe Dunjee. If you're going to study any one person we know a lot about Clara Luper now being celebrated, and I'll get back to her, but Roscoe Dunjee was critical at the critical time. He came to Oklahoma City in 1893, the son of a Baptist minister. They had a farm outside of town near what is now Nakoma Park, so I had a truck garden. And the father was an educated man, had a nice library in the house, but he dies. Very young man. Roscoe, the oldest kid, finishes the 8th grade, has to go to work, tending the farm, the garden, selling the produce, looking for other ways to create a little cash for the family at a critical time. But he's self-educated and he's learning. And he has other mentors in the community who embrace him and say, yes, young man, you can do great things. And in 1950, the same year that the Oklahoma City Council passed an ordinance saying that people of, quote, color, is the way they would put it in the law at the time, cannot move north of 8th Street on the east side of tracks, and white people cannot move south of 8th Street on the east side of the tracks. Against the law. You could be taken to jail if you tried to buy a home on either side of this Berlin Wall in the middle of Oklahoma City. Well, it was later declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, but of course that would be months, if not years later. In the meantime, Roscoe Dunjee had to make a decision. Smart. He had just created a newspaper called the Black Dispatch. Take you to the exact spot where his office was there on East Main Street. And he had to make a choice. Am I going to make money? Am I going to just go along to get along? Or am I going to resist and educate? He made that tough decision. And in the pages of the Black Dispatch, he pushed back. In my favorite headline of all time that I put in my first History of Oklahoma City in 1982, full-page reproduction, The Bloody Fangs of Jim Crow. He understood that Jim Crow, segregation of the races, was an evil part of our community. It hurt black people, but it also hurt the white community. He understood that because out of this would come fear and hate and misunderstanding. And then would come the cruelty, the injustice, and a culture that's not being mended and healed. It's festering. He knew that. The bloody fangs of Jim Crow. He continued to fight back. 1920, the first chapter of the NAACP brought to Oklahoma was here in Oklahoma City, knowing that we have to work together. Yes, we can be an advocate at the individual level, but we're more effective with the group around us, with our network. He brought people together under this banner of we need to resist, we need to fight back, we need to change the law, we need to change people's hearts about all of this. And throughout the 1920s and 30s, he would continue to fight for justice. If a black man was put in jail because he bought a house in the wrong part of town, bail him out, defend him in court, raise a little money, bring in the NAACP. He would do that. Well, things change. Progress. World War II was a huge turning point in American as well as world history. And coming out of World War II, with Harry Truman as president, and the Congress had new priorities, even the Supreme Court, new priorities were evolving. Roscoe thought there was an opportunity to do something. And working with the young attorney hired by the NAACP, brought him here named Thurgood Marshall. This young attorney who had this passion to change his community, with Roscoe Dungy raising the money, and in league with another member of the NAACP, a doctor out of Chickasha. They decided, we need to assault that wall of segregation. And how do you weaken a wall? You take a brick out of the lower part of the wall, and then another brick until the structure begins to weaken. Then you can push it over. He says, we can't beat our heads against the entire wall. We're not going to make that much progress. But let's look and see where we can take advantage here and look for an opportunity. So where in Oklahoma was an opportunity? Under separate but equal. If a black person wanted to go to college, one choice, Langston. It was illegal to go to OU, A&M, or any of the regional colleges. One choice, either that or go out of state. But they didn't have a law school. So Roscoe Dungy, Thurgood Marshall needed a young person to try to enroll University of Oklahoma School of Law, knowing that they would be denied under the law. And they said, we will fight it. We will raise the money. We will do it. They needed a person to do it. They went to Chickasha family and said, we want your son to apply. He said, no, I've already got plans for law school elsewhere. The daughter, Ada Lois Scipio, later Ada Lois Scipio Fisher, said, I'll do it. When the glass ceiling for women was down here, as well as for African Americans, she says, I'll do it. She applies, denied, goes to district court, denied, law of the land, can't enroll her at an all-white college. Goes to the Oklahoma Supreme Court, denied. U.S. Supreme Court, justices that had been appointed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, justices appointed by Harry Truman. Attitude is changing. Maybe separate but equal is not the law of the land. We've seen changes from the Supreme Court recently. And they make a change. They say, wait a minute, you've got to do something. Well, the legislature creates a fake law school in the Capitol. She won't even enroll there. Keeps saying, I'm going to enroll. Under the pressure from the courts, OU lets her enroll in the College of Law. 1949. 1949, she's accepted in the School of Law. One of my mentors, Denzel Garrison, a senator from Bartlesville, was in that law class. He said the students embraced her. Administration, not so much. But she completed her law degree 3 years later. Another case working its way through the Supreme Court, McLaurin. Supreme Court is obviously going to, at some point, say separate but equal is not constitutional. And when McLaurin is enrolled as an undergraduate outside of the law school, Roscoe Dungy, Thurgood Marshall, and others say, we have got to make sure we don't take a step back. We need other people to enroll at OU in the colleges where there's not a similar program at Langston. History department at OU had never enrolled a black person. They find a young woman from Okfuskee County who had grown up in this mixture of Indian and African and black culture with the wounds of slavery, of discrimination, segregation. Clara Looper. Clara says, I will do it. She enrolls at OU and they accept her, and then to the history department. She completes her master's degree there, becomes an educator. And then her story did not end there. Her story is teaching in the Oklahoma City area. She becomes active with Roscoe Dungy in NAACP. She's made the director of the Student Youth Council of the NAACP, and sitting around the table of her kitchen with her 2 children there, they say, Mom, we've got to do something about it. We've got to resist. We have to push back. That day, they decided they would do a peaceful sit-in and follow the advice of Martin Luther King Jr. And on August 19th, 1958, 14 kids walk into Cat's drugstore, demand to be served. We're not. Put up with that abuse. Cat's relented, says, yes, we will serve black people. For the next 6 years, that group would go to different institutions in town. Some would resist, like Spring Lake Park. Some of us baby boomers remember that place. Some would say, okay, yes, we will serve all people, regardless of the pigment of their skin. And then finally, the National Civil Rights Act, 1965, makes it illegal to refuse that service. Maybe it's still in the hearts of people, but the law is changing. Now it turns to changing people's hearts. Clara Luper would even be active there. She would organize the Miss Black pageant every year. Some people don't know it. Jackie Cooper, the car dealer, was her financial supporter at the time. I learned that later. And Mrs. Luper had a radio show for 20 years, speaking about race, injustice. What can we do to have a community together? Through the Freedom Center, through the Historical Society, we have her collections now, an exhibit about Mrs. Luper and the sit-ins and the people who have worked on that over the years. Well, these are examples of people who bumped up against the challenges of their community, looked for opportunities, and burst through, and made progress. And as a historian who understands this, I really believe that we have made progress in terms of fighting against injustice. But as I started today, racism is part of our culture. Prejudice based on religion is part of our culture. We have to realize that. That is a fact. We also have to realize that self-segregation still creates tensions, stereotypes, fear, hatred. We know that we have got to make sure and vigilant that the law provides opportunities for everyone and fights back against injustice, that the courts cannot be used for injustice, that the instruments of the courts are policemen, people in law enforcement, people in the courts follow the law. Still an issue today. Well, things have continued to change since the days of Mrs. Luper and those sit-ins. We've gone through periods of more immigration, adding to our diversity with Asians from Iran, from Vietnam, from Cambodia, and other southeastern Asian countries. We've had immigration from the Hispanic community in Mexico, Central America, South America. We've had the Black Lives Matter area. We've had the issue of gays and lesbians finally getting recognition that there has been discrimination all of these years. Suddenly, now open, dealing with some of those injustices. Oklahoma City is at a time when diversity is a fact of our life, that injustice is there, and what we need to do as citizens who care, like a Roscoe Dungy or a Kate Bernard, is that we have got to resist and not give in to people who say, oh, here's a joke or here's a stereotype. We've got to resist at the personal level. We've got to work with like-minded people to make sure that the laws are there and that the rule of law is followed with respect. But most importantly, I think, and probably the most difficult part, is that we've got to change people's attitudes. How do we do that? It's a combination of education and dialogue. If we're not talking to each other, if we're not moving out of our comfort zone and working to create dialogue and mutual love, we're going to fall back. It's so easy to give in to the dark side of saying, no, fear and hatred are going to drive us. White supremacy drives us. that intolerance drives us. We have to resist. Enough people have to speak up. We have to elect the right people to office. We need to be asking them those tough questions. They don't want to answer it. Most don't. But we've got to ask those questions. We've got to hold them accountable. We have to say, you are wrong with resistance, and keep changing. And from my perspective, as a historian looking at a couple of 100 years of history, we are making progress. Occasionally we slip back. We may have a leader at the bully pulpit who wants to slip back even more. I've said, no, we're not going to follow. So the Human Rights Commission is here for a very good reason. We've got these scars. We've got the culture that is not granting justice to everyone equally. How can we do that together? We have to have this dialogue. The Human Rights Commission of Oklahoma City is a forum for that. Just as your church is a forum for it, just as your family table is a forum for it, we've got to teach our children that there is a better way, and we do not have to give in to injustice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Blackburn, and thank you, Jim Loftus, for helping us have a vision of our history. We're going to change the stage a bit and start involving all of you in our conversation. We're going to bring 4 chairs up here and ask James Cooper to join us. We're going to take about 10 minutes and just have some reflections among us, and then we're going to open this dialogue as Dr. Blackburn is urging us to do, and broaden the dialogue, get all of you involved in your own input, observations, and questions. So let's take 10 minutes, and I'm going to, after what, this is not a break. We're going to go into this, and then we'll take a 10-minute break right after that presentation. Okay, so Dr. Blackburn, if you will be seated, and Jim and Mr. Cooper. And we're going to take 10 minutes to add another interweaving piece of this history of Oklahoma City. And we've asked James Cooper particularly to think about an individual or a story or a time that has affected the LGBTQ community, and what would we add here with a story or two that's pivotal in our understanding of that history. So, James, we're going to just let you lead off. Are there people who come to mind whose stories we should know and understand about LGBTQ human rights?
Sure, and thank you for the invite, and thanks for your backstory as well, and appreciate everyone taking time to be here. Let me be very clear about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer history. Ready? It is all of this. It is not separate from it. It has never been separate from it, and that is pivotal that we say that first and foremost. Black history, Native American history, women's history, Irish history, Scottish history. The history of human beings is queer history. We cannot segregate it off to say, we're going to take a class on LGBT history. We cannot segregate it off to say, here is black history. Because, spoiler, black people, some of them are gay. So that's a very important thing. And let me also just say, because I know I had some folks who were just tuning in specifically for the LGBT part, we will regroup, and there will be a moment where we will have a panel here focusing entirely on that subject. So do not feel that sense of, well, they only did that at the end. This was the opening salvo to something much longer, okay? Just want you to know that. It's also very important for me to say that, because our history is too often marginalized. Our history does not exist in K through 12 books. They purposely remove it. So you asked me about a couple people. I'll sit down now. I just wanted to give you a Vanna White moment.
If we could ask Jim to draw a story or two as you,
Yeah.
Jim, would you be so kind to add a story or two?
Add to the Mona Lisa.
Yes, the Mona Lisa? Yes.
So there are a few key moments I'd like to point you to. The first one is actually right down the street from here. When you think of Main Street, Oklahoma City 100 years ago in the 1920s, the way you go to the mall today where Dillard's, for instance, is, its predecessor, John A. Brown Department Store, used to call our Main Street home. Opulent movie theaters. People walked and shopped, biked this street. Downtown was densely populated with department stores, restaurants. And the people who built those buildings were young people. And I want to prioritize them in this story. You heard Dr. Blackburn say earlier that we had a lot of people in the teens and 20s move to this city to build it. I want you to use your imagination here. This is so important to understand if you want to understand queer history, queer progress, and queer contributions to Oklahoma City. In the 1800s, during that agrarian time, it was very common that in the house it was grandparents, parents, the child. That is the defining family structure of the 1800s, that agrarian farm life. But that means that if you were being raised Protestant or Catholic, Hindu, Muslim, whatever, those teachings defined your understanding of reality. There was no internet. You didn't get to learn other ideas. It really, truly was the value system of grandparents passed on to the parent who's raising the child. But as Dr. Blackburn was talking about the rapid growth of Oklahoma City, what happened in 1889 and in the teens is that these young people move from their homes in rural parts of Oklahoma. They move here for job opportunities. It's an economic story, queer history is. It's a story of human rights, it is. They come here, they build these buildings, brick by brick. They are electricians, they are brick masons. That's who these people were. But it gave them a freedom, because once they were outside of the structure of the house that had the grandparents and the parents, they lived in boarding rooms here, in hostels here, in one-bedroom rooms. And then they started doing something very dangerous, reading books. Oh, they read the books the founders were reading. They were reading the philosophies of Socrates, of Plato. They were reading Dante. They were reading Thomas Aquinas. They were reading Adam Smith. They were reading the new ideas from Freud. They were reading the new ideas that were taking place in 1920s Berlin, saying that a transgender person is, wait for it, a person. And the leading research of Germany at the time in the 1920s, they were getting their hands on it. And with that came a sense of pride in themselves, saying, wait a second, Grandma, Grandpa might have taught me I was not a human being, might have taught me I was a sinful person destined to hell. But now I'm reading this other Christian saying something different. Same book, but I'm reading this other Christian say something different, a different interpretation. Well, you would never have got that in the home because no one was going to give you that interpretation because they wanted you to believe that interpretation. But here, as they built this city, alone in those one bedrooms, that's queer history, and it's young people, first and foremost. So that's revolutionary. Number two is Paul Thompson, 1969. In 1969, it was still illegal to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And by that I mean to act on it. So you had the one bedroom, but what happens if, like, you know, you find someone you fall in love with, or it's a date or whatever? Bars and clubs became the equivalent, if you can believe it, of a church for a queer person. What I mean by that is after World War II, as many of these people started leaving their small towns to go defeat fascism on the European battlefields, they returned to our country. And they faced a choice. Do they come back to the small town and return to that structure of the grandparents, the parents, right? Or do the women, do they take what they were learning working in the factories and that sense of economic freedom, that sense of I can do this on my own? What if I stay at the new port city as we're docking back into the country? The young men are asking this too. What if I could have the anonymity of this port city? San Francisco wasn't born gay. Neither was Chicago or New York. What happened was our people, Oklahomans, Kansas, Louisianans, they said, I don't want to go back home. I can't be myself there, but I can in these urban settings. That's what happened. And Paul, like many queer people of the 40s and 50s, went to a beer bar. Bars and clubs became a safe space, the only safe space for a queer person to get to know another queer person. There were no other safe spaces, because if it was illegal, punishable by 10 years in prison in Oklahoma, by the way, 10 years in prison if you got caught, and people would turn you in. 10 years in prison. But the bars were the safe space you could actually hold each other's hands, maybe even share a kiss, dance. Ooh. And what happened with Paul in 1969 is he goes into a beer bar that's friendly to queer people. Raids on these bars were constant. He did not know sitting next to him was a undercover police officer. Remember, 10 years in prison. Paul Thompson was a Ward 2 resident. We're a frisky bunch. And while he was sitting at the bar, he kisses his 3 friends on the neck to say hello. He doesn't know that that cop is undercover. The cop arrests him, puts him in jail right around the corner here. It was common for the Oklahoman to publish your name, your home address, and your place of employment once you were arrested under vice. Paul did the unthinkable. And by the way, that's the closet. The closet is, I can't come out because if I come out, my boss will fire me. I can't come out because they will burn a cross in my front yard. I can't come out because of the threat of violence. This is not light stuff. This is life or death. Paul did the unthinkable. He was a lawyer. They're also frisky. He said, I'm fighting back. I'm fighting back. By frisky, I mean feisty, I guess, might be the better word. And what he does is he fights back, and in a court of law, the judge says it is unconstitutional, the arrest. It's to arrest someone for lewd and lascivious behavior, and those were the terms. It's too subjective, because what's lewd and lascivious to one person might not be to the other. So it's unconstitutional, thusly case dismissed. So the other story I would tell here and then turn it over for you all is actually not of a queer person, but of a man you might know named Standing Bear. He was a warrior chief. And the United States had removed his people from their sacred lands. His son was 16 and dying of sickness. And in his dying request, the 16-year-old says, bury me on our sacred land. Well, these folk were forced from their tribe, or from their tribal lands, and Standing Bear says, I'm going to honor my son's request. And with a small group of fellow Native Americans, they march in the snow across frozen winter prairie, seeing trails of their own blood behind them. And right outside their tribal lands, we arrest them. He goes into a court of law, and he is the first Native American in that court of law to say, am I not a human being? Can I not bury my son? That's what is at stake. He wins. What is at stake is the question, is a Native American a human being since they're not a Protestant Christian? Is a black person a human being, though they might be Baptist, but their skin is not white enough because they weren't born closer to Oslo? Is a woman a human being, even though someone might have a sacred text that they interpret to say they are less than and must submit forever and always? The question is truly, how do you dismantle white supremacy that says supreme above all are men and white people who are straight? Especially when you have different religious texts, when you have different interpretations of those religious texts, when you have a founding document that says all people are created equal, endowed by their creator toward life, liberty, and happiness, when you have a pluralistic society that says we do not honor one person's religion over the other. And that is queer history. Queer history says we honor all our communities and their histories, their migration story. So the kids built this city. Paul laid a marker in 1969, the year of Stonewall, that moved us into constitutional protections. And then in 2003, we saw a Supreme Court said, you are human beings, you are protected, and we must fight for those protections.
Thank you. Thank you so much, James, for those thoughts and reflections. And now I'm going to be a roving microphone for your thoughts, your observations, and your questions. Who wants to get in on this discussion? Ronnie? Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ronnie Kirk. I've come to over 40 city council meetings. Years ago, I started Juneteenth in 1990. I also picked up Muhammad Ali when he came to Oklahoma City back in the 70s. In my family, they're all nationalities: Japanese, Aiko, Jungsu McCullough. I'm married to a white lady, Sharon Kirk. My daughter, she won the Nadia comedy competition about 7 years ago.
So you are like the diversity of Oklahoma City.
Yes. And
Do you have a question for Dr. Blackman?
one more thing. My son-in-law is Mexican, Miguel Rodriguez. Mr. Cooper, I respect what you did back in the 90s, the things that you went through to get you here today. You was arrested, put in jail, and now you sit before the city council. Young man, you speak so well. You have a lot of knowledge. I have no question, but those are what things I want to say to you.
Thank you so much, Ronnie. Appreciate that very much. What else would you ask ourselves, especially think about the Human Rights Commission? We're trying to figure out how best we can serve the city. How does knowing our history really contribute to that? Anybody? Yes, Dr. Herron.
This question is really for the both of you. Given what's happening in our communities, what's happening on the educational front for history, how do we move forward together?
Well, I thank God that we live in a society that is a true republic with separation of powers. And over time, one branch of government might get off track, in my opinion. Fortunately, there's checks and balances. Right now, the courts are part of that checks and balances. And fortunately for us, we have the ballot box. If we don't like the leadership of one person or one group, we can express ourselves. And that's where our money should be, and our time and our effort, knowing and asking those tough questions. How do they feel about these issues of diversity and equal rights and pushing back against injustice? So I'm still a hopeful person, and I've seen the change in my own lifetime, much less history. And it's a much different world than it was in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah, it really, to me, comes down to, since there's organized opposition to keeping the history I just shared with you from your textbooks, from your children and your grandchildren's textbooks, we must be the ones who share the information. And I think what's so interesting about Oklahoma's history, its queer history, is that when you look at 1969 and what Ward 2 resident Paul Thompson accomplished, he does that the same year as the Stonewall riots in New York, which was where young people stood up against a decades worth of police brutality. The police would just come in and beat the holy hell out of these people. The kids would find themselves, often their parents and grandparents would kick them out of their home because they shared a different interpretation. So the kids would run away to New York. And they had no youth centers, they had no safe spaces. And Stonewall became kind of an oasis for them. And they were the ones who stood up that night and pushed back over 3 days of riots. We have to tell that story. We got to tell that story. That's a community story in New York. But in Oklahoma, known for its belief in the individual, Paul's story is the story of the individual standing up and using the founding documents to make their case. I actually can't think of anything more conservative in Oklahoma than that. Founding documents and the individual. No one should have an objection to that story. And that's what Paul accomplished. So I think we have to tell these stories. We're building youth centers for the kids, straight, gay, whatever, so that they can have safe spaces after school and on breaks. That's what MAPS 4 will do. So that's coming to give them spaces they've never had before where they can find who they are, head into career tech or college. But education, I think, is going to have to be, we have to share these stories, and woe to us if we don't. And then the people who are out there saying, you know, why does it matter if someone's gay? Or like, the response is, you're right. It shouldn't matter, but y'all sure make it matter with the laws you pass. Y'all pass. Gay people didn't pass these laws. We didn't pass these laws. Straight people passed anti-same-sex marriage laws. They passed laws that said 10 years in prison. They got to ask themselves why they did that. They have to ask themselves why they did that. So we got to ask these tough questions of them and get into a new place.
One last thing on noticing change with Black Lives Matter. It really struck me as I was watching the news that our mayor, David Holt, was there and speaking to the group. And I went to JB later and I said, JB, I want that megaphone. Because we had a mayor who represents the entire community speaking to a part of our community about justice. And I wanted the mask. That was during COVID, and I got the mask. I still am looking for that. If anyone in here knows where that megaphone is, I want that in the Historical Society's collections. That would have never happened before. It did not happen in Tulsa, but it happened here with a mayor that appointed Valerie chairman of this commission. So we are making change.
I think the theme of hope and change is strong in this room, as well as a recognition of the power of resistance, of injustice, and of exploitation. They're living side by side here in our city. I'm going to bring this discussion to a close unless there's someone with a burning question or a comment. I look at your faces. Yes, okay, I'm going to bring you the.
I want to say something too.
I'm bringing you the microphone. And I think it's great to have the last word be from our younger generation. So here we go.
Second time in a row. My name's Peggy Dodd. I'm a reporter at KOSU Radio. But I'm actually really curious to gauge your thoughts on the use of the McLaren case and the decision to overturn affirmative action at the Supreme Court.
that decision can only exist. And so too, the other Supreme Court case that week, the one that says a business has the right to discriminate against an LGBT person, those decisions can only exist if the people making those decisions do not know the history I just shared with you. If they do not know that Main Street was a segregated Main Street, right? And what we had to do through the protest of Clara Luper to overcome it. Bishop's Tap Room was a queer-friendly, the first, we think, queer-friendly business downtown across from the Skirvin. Black children did sit-ins at Bishop's in the late 50s, 60s, because it was one of the last restaurants resisting integration. I'm gonna give some people the benefit of the doubt and say maybe they don't know this history. Maybe they don't know what Dr. Blackburn was saying earlier about Clara and the students who were the first admitted, and know that actually some people had a head start over Clara. Some people had a head start over Black folk, Hispanic folk. I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. But that means we have some education to do. What terrifies me is that some of these people do know what they're doing. That some of these people actually might very well know exactly what they're up to, and they do in fact want to take us back to a time of white people who are male and Protestant and straight having that authority over everybody. I'll never quite know, but I just think those are incredibly misguided decisions, because I've yet to hear, well, what's your remedy? Like, what's your remedy, Supreme Court, to making sure that people have equal access to becoming an electrician or a lawyer or a Supreme Court justice? And I haven't heard those remedies yet. I don't know what you have to say. Okay.
All right, now, you had the last question in this meeting. You had the last question in our last meeting, and I'm beginning to rely on you as a way to close these discussions, because it won't be the last word, I assure you, and we hope you'll return, all of you, to our meetings and our discussions, and the future is in our hands, and to make a city that we love and that is a safe space for everybody. So thank you for coming. We're going to take a 10-minute break. And if you're dying to know whether we approve the minutes of the last two meetings, please stay. And we're going to have just a bit of a business meeting, and then we'll close the public meeting at that time. So 10-minute break, and thank you all again for coming.
Mic check. Yep. You better get in. You better get in it. No, it's still really cool, Shaylin. I get excited every time.
Yay. Thanks for protecting us today.
Thank you.
Testing, testing.
Real quick, everybody on the horseshoe. Miss Talley already knows, and Councilwoman Peck knows. You have a microphone in front of you. You can hold that microphone, you can put it to your lapel if you'd like. You have a microphone button next to the little panel that is in between each of you. Will you guys, Mr. That's awesome. Thank you. You can turn your microphone on. If you're going to speak, please do. I can control it from the control room also. If it's too loud, I also control the volume. I'll turn it down real quick, okay? So you don't have to worry about that. The other button you have in front of you with the up and down arrows also controls the speaker that's in between your computers. That's so you can hear everybody else. If it's too loud, you can turn it down. If it's not loud enough, you can turn it up. Or there's a speaker off button there. You can turn it off completely.
Don't turn it off. It's real hard to hear.
That's the quick version.
Thank you.
And we're up and running.
I see. So now it's on.
Now you're on.
Now you're
Now I have the power. Oh my gosh.
There's a little round thing. Oh,
Yeah.
here it is.
All right, we will resume our meeting at this time and go through the agenda for our the rest of our time. Just wanted to take a moment to thank all of you for being here for this special presentation, and you can see by who stayed how many people are interested in our minutes. So we will understand that entirely. But it was quite a moving experience for me, and I just want to thank the Education Committee for their work, and Shaylin Jackson for her work in putting this together. And I hope it's one of many times that we will have great discussions among us and with our constituents. So, all right, let's go to item 5 on the agenda. And I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from both our meeting held on January 24th and our meeting on May 24th, 2023. The minutes were attached and distributed to you. Okay. Ms. Escalera?
Second.
You made a motion to
Yes,
approve?
yes, I motion to approve the minutes from May 24th and January 24th.
All right, is there a
2023.
second?
Second.
All right, second by Ms. Peck. And is there any discussion, any other comment about the minutes? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. All right, we've approved the minutes. Appreciate that. Committee reports. We'll move to our Education and Outreach Committee. Dr. Herron and Cindy Wynn.
Do you want me to do it, Dr. Herron? I got it. So from the Education Committee report, our next meeting will be on Tuesday, September 19th at 6 p.m. Note that time change. We will have special guests from the Human Rights Commission members from Norman as well as Tulsa. And we will also have another special guest, Rachel Johnson with the Jewish Federation of Greater OKC, to discuss the uptick in anti-Semitism, especially in Oklahoma and OKC as well. Our next meeting, which would be our last meeting for the year, is Tuesday, November 28th. This will possibly include Dr. Lindsay Roberts, as well as other Indigenous voices to discuss what is going on, especially in our city. And lastly, December 10th, we will have no meeting, but it will be International Human Rights Day. And Dr. Heron, as well as Dean Couch and I, are planning on some special events for International Human Rights Day. So those are some of our things that we have discussed in the Education Committee.
Can I get the date for the next meeting again, please?
Yes, that is, the next meeting will be Tuesday, September 19th at 6 p.m.
Thank you.
We believe that meeting will take place at the Belle Isle Library. Shaylin, you may have an update on that.
Yes, the booking is just not open yet for that date, so as long as no one snags it before our office, then we will meet there. But we did also, Metro Tech Spring Lake actually reached out, and very long story short, they have us held there as well if Belle Isle doesn't work out.
Okay, so we will be in touch with you as that comes together. We are using this year to try different venues for our meeting, different times, and that this is part of our thinking ahead for the future and for perhaps next year, being able to find a consensus among us about what is the best time, what are the best venues for these meetings to ensure that there's accessibility to the public as well as good times for all of us as we do our work as commissioners.
Dean Couch, I just would be remiss if I didn't say for Christy, oh, she's not here, that the reason why we had the meeting here today is because the PIM team has the equipment, all of this, the greatness that y'all see and are experiencing right now. And so that too is always an option. Well, I say always. Right now it is open for that date as well.
All right, so keep in mind that the city is encouraging us to use this room when it is open, and we may have a good discussion about that. By the time the end of the year rolls around, we will have experienced a lot of different venues, and including this beautiful room, and we can find a good way forward. Okay, any other questions to the Education Committee? We do have Dr. Lindsay Robertson confirmed for that date and time, and that November meeting will be our last meeting, as Cindy mentioned, and we'll look forward to that. Our communications team, Rhonda Hooper and Brian Wall, do you all?
I think we will both tag team on this, but I do have a question relative to education and outreach. How are you communicating the subject matter and so on to the constituencies? Is it through, how are we communicating that as it stands?
We go through Shaylin and Christy Yeager.
Okay.
So we use a lot of the resources from the
Gotcha.
city to do
Okay.
it.
Just want to make sure that you are utilizing that. And then going forward, there are more opportunities for us to get broader outreach and targeted outreach, if you will. So, but that's something that Brian and I are going to work in tandem with Shaylin and Emma and Christy Yeager and company to get our website populated with the content that we need and the outreach that we're desiring and so on. And so messaging, letting us know what the core messaging is going to be will be very helpful in enriching it. Brian, you want to add?
No, I concur with you that, sorry. So now it's on, okay. No, I would concur with you. We talked earlier, and we just want to make a coordinated effort with the city staff, especially now that we've got a new coordinator on, so that we could get the correct information and the proper information and build a base that will be beneficial to add and continue on as we move forward.
Let me ask a question. When you talk about targeted audiences and reaching out to targeted audiences, what do you have in mind?
Well, to all of our constituents and ones who would have a desire for this information. I mean, it's just different target audiences, but it's all of us, okay? That's the only comment about that. And I do have a question that I believe Shaylin's going to add, but I have to ask about the tomatoes and okra.
And I stepped in the hall. One of our department heads gave me okra and a tomato from his garden. I couldn't say no. I will say, and I apologize, you had asked, will we have our webpage up, and we actually do. So I don't know if you wanted me to go through it quickly now or during the compliance officer report.
Why don't we wait for the compliance officer's report? Yeah, the website is up, but it certainly needs to, like you said, to be populated with content that advances our mission, and we will look to you all for leadership on that, but you're not alone, and we will work on that, and perhaps that's an end of the year discussion as well. All right, anything else about the communications committee report? We'll go to the rules committee. Barbara Peck and Leslie Van Buskirk. Do you all have any? Oh, has Leslie left? Yes. Okay. Okay.
That's okay. I can recap. We're not doing anything right now. The commission hasn't brought anything to the rules committee to consider, and we've not been convened. We did cancel our last meeting. The next one is presently scheduled for Tuesday, August 1st. However, unless the commission passes something to rules in this meeting, we'll also cancel that meeting. The following meetings after that are September 26th and December 5th. And we'll just continue on and, with our original plan to revisit the bylaws and that sort of thing after a year or so of us being an active commission and review those things at that time.
Okay. Any questions to the rules committee? Thank you. And complaints and conciliation, Daisy Escalera.
Yeah, Ralph and I were not able to meet this past cycle, I guess the 2 months. But we are, I know Shaylin has an update for us on the complaints, and then we also know that the website's up, so the forms are up online. My only request, since I was talking to Telemundo, is just making sure that we have them in Spanish, or making sure, I know that the website you're able to translate most websites now, like it's part of the website. It's not perfect translation, but I think it'll get someone that's trying to find something. But the forms definitely having them in Spanish or major languages, just the most popular languages, and then maybe offering other accommodations for other languages that are not able to. But we know which are the major languages. But that's it. That's the only thing that I have.
All right, Shaylin, do you have any information about the availability to convert our forms, say, to other languages like Spanish or Vietnamese?
So we are still, like we mentioned the last meeting, the city is really committed to communication access just across the board, with the top, I don't want to say the wrong word, but not only Spanish. But as we work through that, I did hear Christy just tell Telemundo that we will work with the person on her team that is really good at translating to Spanish, to help us with those forms. So I don't have a timeline, but her team is committed to helping us do that, as well as the other forms that we're working on. But in the future, our residents can really expect from us as a city to be more intentional about community access, or communication access is what I will say. We're working on it.
All right, it's a work in progress for sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Trying to be very vague, so.
All right. Any questions about complaints and conciliation? I was struck by the part of the presentation earlier that focused on the peace chief and reconciliation processes. And certainly that's what our ordinance allows us to do too, is to move toward conciliation, mediation, resolution processes of that nature. And I think that's so resonant with the history of human rights. So I understand too the strength of a legal action. I'm totally all about legal action, but I'm struck too about the power of reconciliation. We can learn a lot from our tribal communities about that. Okay, compliance officers report, item 7. Emma, are you going to give this report, or is Shaylin?
This is day 2 for Emma.
Okay.
So I just committed
Day
to
2,
Emma
short
that we will
report.
not put her on the spotlight, other than physically. She is physically in the spotlight. But starting next month, our next meeting, you all will hear from the awesome Emma. So a few things with the compliance officer report. One, you all saw last meeting that the intake forms were complete, other than the translation. And now we are working on completing the sworn forms. That should hopefully be done by the next meeting. And so we're excited about that. The other thing is that we have had 2, I don't really want to call them complaints, I would say inquiries, because they didn't fall within our jurisdiction. So, but one of them being tied to medical care and alleged medical malpractice, so that is not within our jurisdiction, but legal did help us there. Thank you, legal, on at least, giving options on who you may be able to talk to. And then the other being an inquiry tied to a local religious group, and possible homophobia and alleged encouraging murder of the LGBTQ community. That also we were working with legal on, but we have not heard anything else from the complainant, if you will. I'll say complainant because I don't have a better word, but neither of those fallen in our jurisdictions, but as we've been committed to you all, we and our residents, we will never just say that's not us and just walk away. So we work very closely with legal on all of those things. And then I will pivot to the website. It is very temporary in the sense of, to you all's point, we have done some research, just quick research, to show that there are a lot of human rights commissions with robust pages and sites, and so we will continue to work with Rhonda and Brian and the PIM team as Emma has the opportunity to really look and also kind of make suggestions based on best practices. And so we knew it was important to get something up, especially since we do have the intake forms complete. Our residents need to be able to access those. And so at the very top here, you will see that people can access the complaint intake forms here, and it's the ones that you should still have in your binders that you received last meeting. And then it's just really the standard language that we've been using a lot, tied to the HRC coming back, the responsibilities directly from the ordinance, where can they find the meeting schedule, how do they contact you all, and so Emma is there, and then a list of the commissioners and past presentations when appropriate. So good information, but just kind of standard information until we can make it robust. Anything else I'm missing?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Will today's presentation be posted on the website?
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. And all of the presentations are on the city's YouTube channels.
Yeah, we're streaming live right now, right?
Yes. Even this part of the meeting will be on there.
Shaylin, is the website dynamic where we could put video, or not just the links of videos, but actual videos and colorful pictures?
I'm going to defer to people that are not in this room. I believe I have seen on our websites where we'll have the mayor's state of the city. I'm pretty sure even the mayor's state of the city is it's still YouTube, but it's on there. So I do believe that there's different capabilities, but the PIM team is going to be really involved in telling us what those are. And then, as you all will remember, one of the things that the PIM team is helping with, but Emma will be taking over. Can y'all imagine day 2, all the things that Emma is yeah, I'll do that too. But the IT team, our IT team is very, very involved in helping us make a electronic submission, really an electronic, I'm gonna say database because I'm not in IT, but like very robust way to do this, but in a way that meets like legal standards and allows us to, record retention and things like that. So more to come. We will still always have the paper options for people that like good old paper and pencil, and our city clerk will take those and give them to Emma. But we are excited in our future to be able to allow people the electronic submission option.
Shaylin,
Yes.
do you have an extra copy of the communications plan framework that you might be able to give to Emma, or do we need to we'll send it electronically?
You're the one that your team made?
Yeah.
Yes, you have sent that electronically. So if Emma, if you'll just take note to give that to me, I'll forward it. And I'll have you on there so you can make sure that I'm forwarding the right thing.
Perfect.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
I think that's it.
So Emma, you're on here, you're on the agenda. So I'm going to turn to you and just, first of all, assure you that we're on a learning curve with you. We're all on a steep learning curve. And you're day two, we're kind of day two also. So I want you to feel our support around you. I also want to take this moment to thank the city for allowing us, the Human Rights Commission, to have such a wonderful resource in you. I was wondering if you wanted all of us to understand anything else about you or your background or your hopes in the job as we get started here.
Sure. Is this on?
Yes, it's on.
Okay, great. I'm super excited to be here and work with all of you. Like I mentioned, I just finished grad school and I'm fresh in town. As far as hopes for the job, I think I've worked in research at a think tank. I worked with different local governments during graduate school, and I really believe in the power of city government to be responsive to citizens, to kind of like look at its history and try to do better. And so it's really exciting that, OKC, one, brought back the HRC, but to have the opportunity to work with all of you and to sort of lean into, I think, the ideals of what city government can do, and to see, dedicated volunteers helping to realize that goal for the community is really important and exciting. I think as far as goals for the HRC, there's, efficiency, equity, transparency, accountability, all of those things that I think are sort of included in the ordinance, and I've seen in different documents and like past meetings. And so I think the chance to play a supporting role to make it as easy and accessible as community members to submit things, hopefully to establish robust conciliation processes, all of those things is really exciting. And I'm excited to learn alongside with all of you. Like you said, I think the HRC is figuring out what to do, and so I feel like this is a great time for me to join. So I'm just excited. I don't know if there's anything else you want to know about my background.
I want to just give you that opportunity to speak to us today, because this is your first meeting, and we welcome you, and we think we're going to be better because of you and your tremendous talent and skills and dedication, and thank you for taking the job.
Thanks for having me.
I will tell you, Dean, that you just echoed what I told her right before this meeting, that there's so much support from every single person in this room, really every single person in the city, for her to succeed. But I will also let y'all know y'all are in great hands. The questions that she's asked in less than 48 hours, I'm like, I don't know, but you can ask the commission. So everybody's in great hands. Emma with you all, and you all with Emma.
Great, well, thank you. All right, our final remarks and announcements. Are there any remarks or announcements from any of the commissioners? Anything to add for the good of the order? I will say, if you didn't hear the mayor's State of the City address, he gave a shout out to the Human Rights Commission. So I'm so grateful for his support, and the fact that he took time out of that address to mention this new commission is I think, very significant, and thank him for doing that. There are no members of the public who have signed up to address the commission. Are there any comments from the members of our staff, the city staff here? All right, then I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye. All right, any opposed to adjourning this meeting? All right, the motion carries. Thank you.